Chapter 2, Part 3 The Pahlavi Literature Extant. Pahlavi writings may be divided into two classes. First, translations from the Avesta, and secondly, writings of which no Avesta original is known. The translations are always written in sentences of moderate length, alternating with those of the Avesta text. They are extremely literal, but are interspersed with short explanatory sentences, and sometimes with long digressions, serving as a commentary on the text. The Pahlavi writings without an Avesta original are nearly entirely of a religious character, although a few are devoted to historical legends. Well, sometimes what's called historical has a religious tinge, right? Pazand versions of some of these writings, as well as of the translations, exists both in the Avesta and modern Persian characters. Sometimes the Pazand, when written in the Avesta character, alternates with a Sanskrit or Gujarati translation, and when written in the modern Persian character, in which case we may call it a Parsi version, it is usually accompanied by a Persian translation, either alternating with the Parsi sentences or interlined. In the latter case, it is a literal translation, and in the former, it is more of a paraphrase. Some writings are found only in Persian, and this is more especially the case with the Revayats, or collections of memoranda and decisions regarding ceremonial observances and miscellaneous religious matters. These are generally very free from Arabic words, but some of them contain nearly as much Arabic as is used in Muslim Persian writings. Well, if Parsi is so influenced, that wouldn't even indicate a difference religiously, that if they're using the language that everybody else uses. These Revayats also contain metrical Persian versions of some of the more popular Pahlavi and Pazand books. These distant imitations of the Shahnama are generally from 200 to 350 years old. Having thus taken a brief survey of the Pahlavi writings and their connection with Parsi literature, generally, we may now proceed to give further details of such works as are known to be still extant, beginning with the translations from the Avesta. The Pahlavi Vendadad is probably the most important of these translations and extends to about 48,000 words. In estimating more or less accurately the number of words in each of the works he has examined as the best standard of their length, the editor has not included the conjunction va and idafat, and he has counted compounds as either one or two words according to the usual mode of writing them. Each sentence of the Avesta text is continuously followed by a literal translation or attempted translation in Pahlavi, interspersed with short explanations of unusual words and often concluding with an alternative translation. Introduced by the phrase, there is someone who says, in many places the translation of a sentence winds up with a longer commentary containing Avesta quotations and citing the opinions of various old commentators who are named, but regarding whom very little is known, as the next sentence in the Avesta text follows without a break of line. It is often difficult to distinguish it from one of the Avesta quotations before mentioned. In the translation, there are probably fragments of various ages, as some of the commentaries bear traces of translation from Avesta originals, while many of the shorter explanations appear more modern, but they must have been brought together in their present form before the Islamic conquest. All of the known extant copies of the Vendadad with Pahlavi appear to have descended from a manuscript of the Herbad Homast, from which a copy was made in Sistan in AY 554, 1185 of the Common Era, by Ardashir Bahman, and taken to India by Herbad Mahmihir, who had been passing 6 years with the Herbads of Sistan, whether he had come from the town of Kujak on the Indus. After the arrival of this manuscript in India, it was recopied by Rustam Mihirapan, who has forgotten to mention the year. He copied the Ardavirat Namak in AY 618, which is 1249 of the Common Era, and had visited Persia. And from his copy, the oldest manuscript, now extant, was copied by Herbad Mihirapan Ka'i Khusro, who was probably his great-grandnephew, in AY 693, 1324 of the Common Era, in the town of Kambe. This manuscript is now in the University Library at Copenhagen, but is very defective. The first portion of the manuscript, Vendidad 1 to 578, having fallen into other hands, probably on some division of property among brothers, and nearly half the remainder is so much damaged by the ink corroding the paper that it is almost useless. Another manuscript, which appears to be in the same handwriting, but the colophon of which is missing, is in the India Office Library at London. This is also defective, as the folios containing the Vendidad 1 to 348 and 482 to 310 have fallen into other hands and have been replaced by modern writing. The folios containing Vendidad 349 to 481 and a few others are damaged by the corrosive action of the ink used by Mihirapan Ka'i Khusro. From a comparison of these two manuscripts, we can ascertain the state of the text 553 years ago, except with regard to Vendidad 1 to 348, and a few other short defective passages for which we must refer to other old manuscripts. One of these was formerly in the library of Dastur Jamasp Asa at Navsari, and is said to have been transferred from Bombay to Tehran in Persia some 20 years ago. It was copied probably from the Copenhagen manuscript in AY 963, 1594 of the Common Era, by the Herbad Ardashir Ziva in the town of Broch, or is it Broch? It is rather carelessly written, and many of the latter copies are descended from it. The descended manuscripts can generally be traced by their copying errors, which have been insufficiently erased, or by their misreading ill-shaped letters, but it is hazardous to argue on the authority of only one such blunder. Another old manuscript, now in the University Library at Bombay, was obtained at Broch. It corresponds very closely to the one last mentioned, and is probably about the same age, but its colophon is lost. The Pahlavi Vendidad was printed at Vienna, separate from the Avesta text, and was published by Spiegel in 1853. His text can be much improved by careful collation with the old manuscripts above mentioned. None of these manuscripts contain the 12th Fargard of the Vendidad, so that the Pahlavi translation of this Fargard, which occurs in a few modern manuscripts, is probably the work of some Dastur in India. It is difficult to account for the omission of the 12th Fargard in the old manuscripts, as the Fargards are all numbered, so that any accidental leap from the 11th to the 13th ought to have been soon discovered, and it is unlikely that the 12th Fargard would have occupied exactly the whole of any number of folios which may have been lost from some original manuscript before it was copied. The Pahlavi Yasna contains about 39,000 words, exclusive of the Kiriya, or introductory prayers. It is written alternating with its Avesta, in the same manner as the Vendidad, but the long interpolated commentaries are much less common, and fewer commentators are quoted, so it may be suspected of containing less old matter than the Pahlavi Vendidad. For the oldest manuscripts of the text, we are again indebted to Herbad Mihrapan Kai Khusro, who copied at Kambay a manuscript of the Yasna with Pahlavi, now in the University Library at Copenhagen, and AY 692, 1323 of the Common Era. From a manuscript written by Rustam Mihrapan in the same year, he also wrote a second manuscript of the same, which is now in the library of Dastur Jamasje Chiharje in Bombay, and is dated only 22 days later than the first, but it does not mention whence it was copied. Both these manuscripts begin with a series of introductory prayers in Avesta and Pahlavi, of which the commencement is lost. Some of the folios are also damaged in both by the corrosive action of the ink used by the writer, and one folio in the middle of the Bombay copy is lost, and many others are worm-eaten. Several more modern manuscripts of the Yasna with Pahlavi exist, but they are less common than those of the Vendidad. The Avesta and Pahlavi texts were printed separately at Vienna and published by Spiegel in 1858, but his text would be improved by collation with the old manuscript in Bombay. The Pahlavi Visparad contains about 3,300 words and resembles in character the Pahlavi translation of the Yasna. Probably the oldest copy of this text, Extant, is contained in a manuscript of miscellaneous texts brought from India by the author of these essays. This copy was written by Peshyotan Ram Kamdin at Broch in AY 766, which is 1397 of the Common Era. The Avesta and Pahlavi texts were printed separately at Vienna and published by Spiegel along with the Yasna text in 1858. The Hadokt Nask in Pahlavi is a mere fragment containing about 1,530 words and consisting of 3 fargards, which were probably not consecutive in the original Nask. The first fargard details the value of reciting the Echem Vahu formula under different circumstances, and is probably an extract from the first division of the Nask. The second and third fargards describe the fate of the souls of the righteous and wicked respectively during the first 3 days after death, but their contents do not agree very well with the description of the Nask in the Din card, where it is stated to have consisted of 3 divisions containing 1,302 and 19 sections respectively. The total number of sections is given as 133, so there must be an error of 1 in some one of these 4 numbers. The oldest copies of the text known to be extant are contained in the manuscripts, miscellaneous text written about 1397 of the Common Era, which includes the Visparad, as mentioned above, also in a very similar manuscript in the University Library at Copenhagen, which must have been about the same age. The Avesta and Pahlavi texts alternating in the manuscript. Alternating as in the manuscripts were printed at Stuttgart and published with the Arta Viraf Namak in 1872, and a translation of the Avesta text will be found in the third essay. The Vishtasp Yasht is found with the Pahlavi translation of about 5,200 words, but only one manuscript has been examined. This is in the library of Dastur Jamasje in Bombay. It is said to have been written some 35 years ago. The Avesta text is probably descended from the Clermont manuscript used by Westergaard and now at Copenhagen. And the Pahlavi text has the appearance of a modern translation. Pahlavi translations of other yashts also exist, such as those of the Au Harmazd Yasht about 2,000 words. The Hershed Yasht and Mah Yasht, about 400 words. The Srosh Yasht Hadokt, about 700 words. The Haptan Yash Behram Yasht, and probably others which have not been examined. In these, as in all other translations, the Pahlavi alternatives with the Avesta, there seems little doubt that most of these Yasht translations are old. Among the remaining translations are the Pahlavi texts of the Atash Nyayish, about 1,000 words, the Kershed Nyayish, about 500 words, the Aban Nyayish, about 450 words, the Afrigan Gatha, the Afringan Gahanbar, the Afringan Dahman, Yasna 59 to 15, Spa, what's SP stand for? The last containing about 450 words, the Afrin Miazd, also called the Afrin Zaratusht, the Siroza, in both its forms, containing about 530 and 650 words, respectively, and many short extracts from the Yasna, which are much used in the Kurda Avesta, such as the Eshem Lohu, Yatha Ahu Va'erio, and Yenhe Hatam formulas, Yasna 5, 1 and 2, 35, 4 to 6, 13 to 15, 1, 65 to 67, what's the SP stand for? The Chidak, Avistak e Gasan are selections from the Gathas. Is an old miscellaneous collection of short passages, sometimes merely single lines from various parts of the Gathas, alternating with the usual Pahlavi translation. Altogether, 76 lines are quoted from Avesta, and the Pahlavi translation of about 1,100 words does not differ materially from that given in manuscripts of the Yasna. Several copies of this selection exist, but the oldest seems to be that in the manuscript of miscellaneous text written in 1397, as mentioned above. Intermediate between the translations and purely Pahlavi works, there are those which contain many Avesta quotations, which are often translated, but do not in themselves form any connected text, as the bulk of the work is Pahlavi. The following three are of this class. The Irangistan contains about 30,000 words, including the Avesta quotations, and many of which are no longer extant in the Zend Avesta. It consists of 3 fargards and treats of a great number of minute details regarding rites and ceremonies and precautions to be adopted while performing them. Its contents correspond very closely with the description of the second section of the Husparam Nask, as given in the Din card, and the name of that section was Neurangistan. The opinions of many of the old commentators mentioned in the Pahlavi Vendadad are also often quoted in this work. A manuscript of the Neurangistan was brought from Persia to India by Dastur Jmasp Walayata in 1720 of the Common Era. This was copied from a manuscript dated AY 840, 1471 of the Common Era, but whether it still exists is uncertain. It was recopied by Dastur Jmasp Asa of Navsari in AY 1097, which is 1727 of the Common Era, and this copy is now in the library of the Khan Bahadur Dastur Noshir Avanja, Jamaspja at Pune. Several later copies exist, but owing to the text being difficult and little known to copyists, their variations from the original are unusually numerous. The Parhange, Oim, Kaduk are vocabulary of the Avesta and Pahlavi, so called from its first words being Oim, Kaduk, consist of about 3,300 words, including the Avesta, and contains several words and phrases of which are no longer extant in the Avesta texts. Very old copies of this vocabulary exist in two manuscripts of miscellaneous Pahlavi text, one brought from India by the author of these essays and written in 1397, and the other at Copenhagen, written about the same time, Dastur Hoshangje's edition of this vocabulary, printed at Stuttgart and published in 1867 with the title of an Old Zund Pahlavi glossary, could probably be improved by collation with these old copies of the text. The Afrine Dachman, including the Aogamada Etcha Avesta quotations, contains about 2,000 words. The first of the quotations is Yasna 760. What does SP stand for? But most of the others are no longer extant in the Avesta. They are also found with alternating Pazand and Sanskrit translations, and without the introductory sentences of the Ukraine. We may now proceed to notice the purely Pahlavi works, which contain but few quotations from the Avesta, and those are generally references to proper texts to be recited on particular occasions. There is much diversity in the style of these compositions, some being merely descriptive, in which the language is easy and the construction simple, while others are more philosophical and their language difficult and obscure. I don't know of Bible commentary that is so honest about the changes and discrepancies and stuff. The Vijar Kardeh Vini, containing about 1,900 words, might almost be classed with the preceding, as the latter part of it contains several quotations from the Avesta. It is a very miscellaneous collection of introductions and details regarding religious matters, resembling a Rivayat, and divided into 3 chapters, professing to have been written by Medyoma, one of the old commentators quoted in the Pahlavi translations and other works. An old manuscript of the work, written in Firman, AY 609, 1240 of the Common Era, is said to have been brought to India and deposited in the library of the Mahdi family in Surat, where it was copied in AY 1123, which is 1754 of the Common Era, by an uncle of the late high priest of the Parsis in Bombay. From this copy, the text was edited by Dastur Peshotanja and printed in Bombay in 1848, as already mentioned, on page 59. We're on page 100 right now. This work includes 3 or 4 of the minor texts hereafter mentioned, as will be noticed when we come to them. The Deen card is the longest Pahlavi work extant, although the first portion of it, containing the first and second books, is missing. The latter part of the work, consisting of books 3 to 9, contains about 170,000 words. Getting bitten by bugs here. The third book consists of a series of explanations of religious matters and duties for general information and removal of doubt, concluding with the description of the solar and lunar years and a legendary history of the Deen card, which is evidently identified with that of the Gnostics. Generally, this book contains 73,000 words. The fourth book contains various statements selected from the religious books by Adarfrobage Farooq Zadan, the original editor of the Deen cards. See page 55. We're on page 151. We're on page 101. Extending to about 4,000 words, these statements commence with the characteristics of the Ameshaspends, and in discussing of those Shat Rovair, the third Ameshaspend, an account is given of the endeavors of various sovereigns from Vishtasp to Khusroe Kvadan no Shirvan to collect and preserve the national literature. The fifth book contains the sayings of the same Adar Frobag from a book called Zimra. There are, of course, many other ways of reading this name, and his replies to many questions on obscure and difficult matters in history, astrology, and religious customs, extending to about 6,000 words. The sixth book contains the opinions of the Por Yodkshan, professors of the primeval religion of Zarathustra, on all matters of tradition, customs, and duties, with many sayings of Ararpada, Maraspendan, the whole extending to about 23,000 words. The seventh book contains an account of the wonders or miracles from the Mazda-Yastian religion, from the time of Gayomard, the first man, to that of Shoshan, the last of the future prophets, including many details of the life of Zarathustra, and extending to about 16,000 words. The eighth book contains an account of the 21 Gnostics, giving a short description of each, but going into more details of the four Gnostics, 15 to 18, which constitute the majority of the 7 legal Gnostics. This book consists of about 20,000 words. The ninth book contains a much more detailed account of the contents of each Vargard of the first 3 Gnostics, concluding with some remarks upon selections from the whole Yasna, and extending to about 2,700 words. The work concludes with colophons to the extent of nearly 1,000 words, which relate that this latter portion of the Deen card was copied at the place where it was found, Kushkand in Asuristan, from an original which had been written by elders of the family of Darpada, Maraspendan, by Mahvandad, Narimahan, Behram, Mihirapan, and finished on the 24th day of the 4th month, AY 369, 7th of July, 1000 of the Common Era. From this copy, others dated AY 865, being 1009. These dates no longer exist in the manuscript brought from Persia, but are taken from copies and from the account given by Mullah Firuz in his Avijah-Din, and 1038 have descended, and the last appears to have been brought from Persia to Surat in AY 1152, 1783 of the Common Era, by Mullah Bahman, and about 4 years afterwards, some copies of the manuscript of AY 1038, 1669 of the Common Era, were spread among the Parsis, but before any of these copies were made, the manuscript from Persia had been lent to various parties, and more than 1/6 of the whole had been abstracted, so that all the manuscripts are now deficient to that extent, but about of 69 folios are missing. 64 have been discovered, though they still remain in various hands. The manuscript itself is in the library of Dastur Sohrabje Rustamje, the high priest of the Kadme sect of Parsis in Bombay. Dastur Pashotanje is publishing an edition of the text with Gujarati and English translations, and has been already mentioned, page 59, we're on page 102, but it will be many years before he can complete his work. Well, so when this book was written, if anybody knows if it was completed. The name Dadistani Dini is usually confined to a work of about 30,000 words written by Dastur Chahar Yudan Daman, who was a high priest of the Mazdagasnians in Fars and Kirman about AY 350, so 981 of the Common Era. And it's altered to 250 in an old manuscript written by Marjpan Faradun, but whether the alteration was made by the original writer or not is uncertain. It consists of 92 questions and answers about religious duties, customs, and legends. The last of these answers seems to be incomplete, so that a portion of the original work may have been lost. The oldest manuscript of this text that has been examined was written in Kerman by Marjpan Faradun in AY 941, 1572 of the Common Era. His writing was to supply the deficiencies in a still older manuscript, of which only 28 folios now remain, and his manuscript has, in its turn, had its deficiencies supplied from latter copies. In this manuscript of the text, the Dadastani Dini is preceded and followed by other somewhat similar writings by the same Dastur and by the Zad Sparame Yudan Daman, who appears to have been his brother. The first part of these extra writings contains about 2,300 words, and the last portion and the last part about 30,000 words, of which 5,000 are lost. If these writings be taken as part of the Dadastani Dini, the whole work contains about 78,000 words extant. The author of these essays recommended the Parsis 12 years ago to have this work translated, and it is said that a translation was prepared but has not been published. If the non-appearance of this translation be due to any of the opinions of the old Dastur of Kerman, differing from those of Parsis of the present day, it is to be regretted, as the proper course in such a case would be to publish a correct translation and point out the probable cause of the original writer's errors and notes. This is all the more necessary as none of the Pahlavi books are free from statements which would be considered heterodox nowadays. Thus, whenever they give details regarding the Gvatuk Das, or next of kin marriage, they describe it as applying to closer relationships than present customs tolerate. But whatever may have been the reasons for the establishment of this custom when the Zoroastrian faith was in power, it is evident that when the faith was held merely by a persecuted remnant of the Persian people, their priests advocated the custom as a specially meritorious act with the view of discouraging intermarriages with their Muslim neighbors, which would have led to the final extinction of Zoroastrianism. Well, not necessarily, because Islam tolerates different religions, right? That the present customs of the Parsis are not quite the same as those of 8 or 10 centuries ago is not surprising when we consider that it was the usual practice of all Christian sects who had sufficient power 2 or 3 centuries ago to put heretics and witches to death by burning or otherwise. Such practices were then not only legal, but were considered highly meritorious. Now, they would be called judicial murders. And, well, whether they called it or not, it's just the law of the land. It's, it is murder, whether it's legal or not. See, that's why you can't just go, oh, it's legal. You got to do better than that, people. And the next of kin marriage, actually, well, we've talked about that elsewhere, that may not have been what it meant, and there was a tradition that developed around a king who wanted to marry his daughter, and then they, developed this to justify the king. Anyways, It had probably something to do with the dislike of Eastern nations to any absolute alienation of family property, a feeling which led even the Jews to adopt a stringent, exceptional marriage laws in case of failure and direct heirs. Well, that next of kin marriage in terms of forced marriage with widows, that was probably what's being referred to, right? But that's, Bible-believing Christians believe in that one too. The Shikand Gumani Vijar is a controversial work of about 1,800 words, written by Mardan Farouk Au Harmazdad, who acknowledges the instruction he has received from the Dean card of Adar Farbage Farouk Zadan, which contained 1,000 chapters, Dar, as well as from the Dean card of Adar Padyavan, a work no longer known unless it be the book of the Ma'inyo Iqard, mentioned hereafter. The writer begins by answering some questions of Mihiryare Mahmadan of Ispahan regarding the existence and work of the evil spirits being permitted by Uharmazd. He then proceeds to prove the existence of God and to disprove the arguments of atheists and of those who disbelieve in the evil spirit and attribute both good and evil to God. And he concludes by criticizing the doctrines of the Jews, Christians, and Manichaeans. Most of the manuscripts of these works are incomplete, and only the first 3,600 words are found in the Pahlavi character. The more complete manuscripts are in Pazand with Naryosang's Sanskrit translation, but there are evident indications of the Pazand text having been originally transliterated from Pahlavi. An edition of the Pahlavi and Pazand text has been prepared by Dastur Hoshangje, but it is not yet printed. The Bundahish calls itself the Zand Akas. Zand knowing are traditionally informed. The word men, from with which many of the manuscripts commence, appears to be in the latter edition, as it is not found in the Copenhagen manuscript and has evidently been added by a latter hand in the only other manuscript of equal age mentioned in the text, which is first about the Uharmaz's original creation and the antagonism of the evil spirit, and afterwards about the nature of the creatures from the original creation till the end, which is the future existence, just as it is revealed by the religion of the Mazdiasnians. And the Mullah Firuz Library in Bombay contains two modern Persian manuscripts, namely, respectively, the Din Card and the Din Khird. These were written by Mullah Firuz to describe his voyage to Persia and the answers he obtained to 78 questions proposed by the Indian Dasturs. These Persian works must not be confounded with their namesakes in Pahlavi. The contents of this book are too well known to require further description. It contains about 13,000 words, but the manuscripts do not agree either in extant or arrangement. The most complete and best arranged text, but not the most accurately copied, is that in the manuscript of miscellaneous Pahlavi text at Copenhagen, which is about 500 years old and has lost one or more folios in the middle of the text of the Bundahish, but contains more sections, chapters 28, 29, 30, and 32 of Anquetil than are found in other independent copies. The text is found differently arranged, without those sections, but more accurately copied in similar manuscripts of miscellaneous texts brought from India by the author of these essays and written in 1397. Most of the manuscripts in India seem to have been copied from the latter of these two old manuscripts, but they sometimes vary further in their arrangement. The Copenhagen text was lithographed in facsimile and published by Westergaard in 1851. A French translation was published by Anquetil in 1771, and German translations by Mundishman in 1863 and by Juste in 1868. The Minoke card, called a Bazand Inyo card, are the Spirit of Wisdom, consist of 62 answers given by the said spirit to inquiries of a wise man regarding tenets, legends, and morals of the Mazdayastian religion. This word, which is traditionally read Madoya. Now, this word which is traditionally read Madonad has been pronounced Minavad or Ma'in-Evad and traced to a supposed ancient Persian form Ma'e-Nevad. Whether such a form actually existed is not known, and if it did, we should expect to find its final letter represented by D equals T in Pahlavi, and not by a light D. You know, D with the dot, so duh, duh, instead of duh. On the other hand, the Persian Mino must have been Minok in Pahlavi. This would be liable to be written Minog, and the addition of circumflexes, all the uses which in Pahlavi are not thoroughly understood, changes this word into the traditional Madonad. It contains about 12,000 words, but the text ends abruptly, as if incomplete, and its introduction bears some resemblance to that of the Shikand Gumani, so as to lead to the suspicion that it may be the first portion of the Deen card consulted by the author of that work. An old manuscript of the Pahlavi text was brought by Westergaard from Persia, but the Pahlavi versions in India are probably mere translations from the better-known Pazan text, which generally alternates with Naryosang's Sanskrit translation. A manuscript of this Pazan Sanskrit text, written in 1520 of the Common Era, is preserved in the India Office Library in London. A few fragments of the Pazan text were published with a German translation by Spiegel in his Grammar of the Parsi Language, 1851, and his Traditional Literature of the Parsis, 1860. And the whole text, both Pazan and Sanskrit, was published by West with an English translation in 1871. The Shahyast, or Pahlavi Ravayat, contains about 10,000 words and treats of sins and good works, the proper treatment of corpses and other kinds of impurity, with the proper modes of purification and the proper uses of the sacred thread and shirt, other customs and rites, with the reasons for reciting each of the gathas, and details of the extant of those hymns, all subjects which are generally explained in the Persian Rivayats, but here the statements are enforced by quotations of the opinions of several of the old commentators, and by references to some of the Nasks no longer extant. The oldest extant copies of this work are contained in the two manuscripts of miscellaneous Pahlavi text written about 500 years ago, which have been already mentioned. In these manuscripts, the text appears in two detached portions of about 7,500 and 2,500 words, respectively. The Arda Viroth, Namak, or Book of the Arda Viroth, contains about 8,800 words and describes what was seen by a chosen high priest in a vision of the other world, where he was shown the rewards of the righteous, the punishments of the wicked, and the neutral state of stationary expectation of those who belong to the neither extreme. Sometimes written Arda'i, which should perhaps be read Ardak, having been altered into Ardag, which is not distinguishable from Ardat. It is no doubt merely a title meaning righteous. The Parsis say, however, that it is also a name. Now, people would be given names. So the Arda Vuroth. It is stated in this work that the Arda Vuroth was called Nikshapur by some. This is not only the name of a town, but is also that of one of the old commentators, sometimes quoted in the Pahlavi Vendadad, and very often in the Narangastan. It is possible, therefore, that this commentator may have written the book of Ardaviroth. Copies of this text are found in the two old manuscripts. A miscellaneous text written about 500 years ago, which have been already mentioned. A manuscript of a Pazand and Sanskrit version written in 1410 was also brought from India by the author of these essays, and Persian versions, both in prose and verse, are likewise extant. The Pahlavi text was printed at Stuttgart and published with an English translation in 1872. The Marigan-e Gosht-e Furiano, of about 3,000 words, is a tale of the evil Aktya of the Abanyasht, 81 to 83, propounding 33 enigmas to Yo Ishto, Yo Fryananam, to be solved on pain of death. After this is done, he has to solve 3 enigmas in his turn, but fails and is destroyed. The enigmas are generally of a very trivial character, and 9 of them seem to be omitted. The text accompanies that of the book Ardaviroth in the 2 old manuscripts before mentioned, and was published with it in 1872. Now, this 8,800 word text of the vision of the other world, or the rewards of the righteous and the punishments of the wicked, and the neutral state are brought up. People think that it's, is where the accounts of Muhammad's vision of ascent came from, and that, because there's more known about that than anything previously in Prophet Muhammad's life, but these texts are after that, so... The Bahman Yasht, of about 4,200 words, professes to be a revelation from Abu Harmaz to Zarathustra of the suffering and triumphs of the Mazdayastian religion. Now, I would say difficulties rather than suffering, because suffering can imply a chosen making it worse. If we look at Buddhist words that are rendered with that. From his time to the end of the world, apparently in imitation of part of the Sudkarnask, as it mentions the Muslimin, and gives many details of the sufferings occasioned by them. It must have been written a considerable time after the Muslim conquest. Well, not everything about it was Islamic, so Yeah, that would probably be better not to call it the Islamic conquest. It details how the power of the Mazdayassian religion is to be restored by the victories of Vehirame or Javand, a prince, Ka'i, of the Kayan race, who at the age of 30 is to put himself at the head of Indian and Chinese armies, whose power will be felt as far as the banks of the Indus, which is called the country of Bamboo. Well, I would say that part of India being conquered by China would be how this would come about. But we'll see, another year or so, right? Foreigners should be careful not to confound the name with Bombay, which is merely a European corruption through the Portuguese of Mumbai, a corruption which native writers still avoid when writing in the vernacular languages. The Pahlavi text of this work is found in the old manuscript of miscellaneous texts at Copenhagen, and its two copies, one of which is at Paris, but no other copies have been met with. A Pazan version is, however, common in India. Spiegel has given a German translation of extracts from the Bachman Yasht in his traditional literature of the Parsis. In the same old manuscript at Copenhagen is the Endarje Hudavare Dinak, containing about 1,800 words, of which 1/3 has been lost, as 2 folios are missing. This name may also be read Kushvare or otherwise. This admonition, Andarj, is given in reply to questions asked by his disciple, Ashikard. No other copy of this work has been met with, but it will be found, of course, in the 2 copies of the Copenhagen manuscript. In the same manuscript is also a copy of the Medigane Gujastak Abalish, containing about 1,200 words. The accursed Abalish appears to have been a Zandik or heretic who relied upon later corrupt traditions in preference to the true faith. In the presence of Mamun, the commander of the faithful, Amir-e Mu'minin, so a Muslim ruler, at Baghdad, he proposes 7 questions to a moped, who replies to the satisfaction of Mamun and the confusion of Abalish himself. The writer concludes by blessing Adar Forbage, Farooq Zadan, the author of an old edition of the Deen card, for having destroyed Abalish, and he could not have written this work before 830 of the Common Era, as Mamun was living at that time. Many copies of it exist in Pahlavi, Pazand, and Persian. Well, some things could have been rewritten to include mention of people too, so there is some of that going on, but in this case I don't know of any example per se. The Jamasp, Namak, consist of Jamasp's replies to King Gushtasp's questions regarding creation, history, customs of various nations, and the future fate of the religion. The most complete manuscript examined contains about 5,000 words, but seems unfinished. The Pahlavi text is rare. A very old manuscript in Dastur Pechotanja's library in Bombay contains about 1/4 of the text, but no other copy has been met with. The Pazand and Persian versions are found in many manuscripts. A very old manuscript in the library of Dastur Jamasbja in Bombay has been called the Pahlavi Shahnameh, as it contains several short tales connected with kings of Persia. Its colophon states that it was finished in India in the town of Tanakh. And another colophon in the middle of the manuscript. This place is called Tamuk in Jazirak, or Gujarat. Zillah, the date being the 6th day of the 6th month, 691 year of religion. On the 19th day of some month in 691 AY, or 1322 of the Common Era, by Mihirapan Kai Khusro, the copyist who wrote the oldest manuscripts of the Yasna and Vendadad that are still extant. The handwriting, however, more nearly resembles that of the old manuscript of miscellaneous texts at Copenhagen, which contains several copies of Mihirapan's writings, with his colophons attached, so that the Pahlavi Shahnameh may also be a copy of his manuscript. But like that at Copenhagen, it is certainly about 500 years old. This manuscript is much worm-eaten, but a copy of it exists at Tehran, made 110 years ago, before the original was much damaged, which probably supply most of the deficiencies in those texts of which no other copies are known to exist. Of the text contained in this old manuscript, and at its single complete copy, the following are not known to exist elsewhere in Pahlavi. 1. Yedkar-e Zariran, of about 3,000 words, containing an account of the war between King Vishtasp and Arjasp. 2 cities of the land of Iran, about 880 words, giving their names and a very brief account of each. 3 wonders and prodigies of the land of Sistan, at about 290 words. 4 Khusro-e Kavadan Noshirang, and the slave boy who replies to the king's 13 inquiries as to what things are the most pleasant, about 1770 words. 1770 words. 5 admonitions to the Mazdayastians in 6 separate paragraphs, about 940 words. 6 Andarje Khusro-e Kavadan, also known as Noshirvan, about 380 words, said to contain the dying injunctions of that monarch. 7 sayings of Adar Frobag-e Faruk Zadan and Bakht Afrid, about 320 words. The following texts contained in this old manuscript are also found in Dastur Pashotanj's old manuscript, which has been already mentioned as containing part of the Jamasp Namak, but they are not known to exist elsewhere in Pahlavi. The Marigan-e C. Rose, about 460 words, is a statement of what ought to be done on each of the 30 days of the month. At the end, it is called an admonition. Andarj of Adarpad-e Maras Pendan to his son, which leads one to suspect that it may be a detached portion of his Pond-namak. 2. Dirakt-e Asurik, about 800 words, is a debate between a tree and a goat as to which of them is the more worthy. 3. Chatrang Namak, about 820 words, relates how a chessboard and a chessman were sent by Devasarum, a great king of India, to Khusro-e and Noshak Uruban, known as Noshirvan, with a request for the explanation of the game, which was given by Vajurg Mihire Buktakan, who afterwards takes the game of Niv Ardashir to India as an effectual puzzle for the Indian sages. 4. Injunctions given to men of the good religion, about 800 words. 5. The 5 dispositions of priests and 10 admonitions, about 250 words, which also occur in the Vajarkard Dini, page 13 to 16 of Dastur Pesotunji's edition. 6. Daruk-e Khurasandi, about 120 words. 7. An Anecdote of King Vahirame Var Javand, about 190 words. 8. Advice of a certain man, Fulan Gabra, about 740 words. The following texts contained in the 2 old manuscripts of Dastur Pesotanje and Dastur Jamasje. A third copy exists in the library of the latter Dastur. 1. Forms of letters to kings and great men, about 990 words, found also in the Vajarkard-e-Dini, page 102 to 113 of Dastur Pesotunji's edition. 2. Form of marriage contract, dated AY 627, 1258 of the Common Era, about 400 words. 3. Vachak Chand, some sayings of Adarpada Maharaspendan, about 1,270 words. 4. Sta Yishane Drone Va Sipastarie Miazdpan. Miazdpan. About 560 words. The following texts contained in Dastur Jamasbi's old manuscript. Many copies exist. 1. Pund Namak-e Zarathusht, about 1,430 words, contains admonitions as to man's duties. A copy of 3/4 of this text exists in the University Library at Copenhagen. 2. Andarpade Maharaspendan, about 1,700 words, is sometimes called his Pund Namak and contains his advice to his son Zarathustra, but not Zarathustra, the prophet. But the last quarter of the text is missing in the old manuscript, and the end is very abrupt in other manuscripts, which makes it probable that the next text in the old manuscript, the Madigan-e C. Rose, may have been originally the conclusion of this, as has been already noticed. This Pahlavi text was printed in Bombay and published with the Gujarati translation by Shahar Yarja Dadabai in 1869, and an English version of this Gujarati translation by the Reverend, or is it revered, Shapurja Adalja, was published in 1870. But being a translation of the original, it differs considerably from the meaning of the original. 3. Karnamaka Artak Shira Papakan, about 5,600 words, records many of the actions of King Ardashir and his son Shahpuhar
beginning with the discovery of Sasan, the father of the former, among the shepherds of Papak, and ending with Uharmazd, the son of the latter, ascending the throne. But this is not the original work, as it begins with the phrase, in the Karnamak of Arakshira Papakan. It was thus written. A Gujarati translation of this text was published by Dastur Pesotanje in 1859. Pandnamak e Vajurj Mihere Buktakan, the prime minister of King Khusrau Noshirvan, contains about 1,690 words, but it seems to be merely a fragment of the work, as it ends very abruptly. This text is also called the Ganj-e-Shah-e-Gan, because it states that it was placed in the royal treasury, Ganje Shah Hakan, in the old manuscript. The other old manuscript in Dastur Peshotanja's library, which includes some of the above-mentioned texts, likewise contains the following. 1. Marigan-e Si Yazadan, about 80 words, stating the one special quality of each of the 30 Yazads, who give their names to the days of the month. Another similar statement in the old manuscript of miscellaneous texts brought from India by the author of these essays specifies different qualities in most cases. 2. Marigan-e Ma Favardin Roje Horvadad, about 760 words, which details all the remarkable occurrences said to have taken place at different periods on the 6th day of the first month of the Parsi year. A Persian version of this text is found in the Riviyats. Another Marigan-e Si Rose, about 1,150 words, detailing the proper business and duties for each of the 30 days in the Parsi month, and the 5 Gatha days at the end of the Parsi year. This text is also contained in the Vajarkard-e-Dina, page 113 to 125 of Dastur Pesotanji's edition. Copies of the remaining text are numerous, both in Pahlavi and Pazand. The Madigan-e-Haft, a Mashaspen, about 990 words, contains a detail of the various duties of the 7 Mashaspens, as revealed by Uharmazd to Zarathusht. The Andarje Danak Mard, about 520 words, details the advice of a wise man to his son. The Pahlavi Pazand Farhang, about 1,300 words, is the glossary of Huzvarish and the Pazand, edited by Dastur Hoshangje and published in 1870. It is called the Marik Namake Asurik, or Assyrian vocabulary, by Dastur Pesotanje in the list of Pahlavi works given in the introduction to his Pahlavi grammar, but the origin of this name requires explanation, as it appears to be unknown to the Dasturs generally. The Patit-e Adarpade Maraspend, about 1,490 words, is a form of renunciation of every possible heinous sin to be recited by the sinner. The Patit-e about 1,000 words, is a similar form of renunciation, but somewhat abbreviated. Avar Chime Dron, about 380 words, regarding the symbolism of the ceremonial wafer cakes and the use of them in the Myazd, or sacred feast. The Pahlavi Ashirvad, or marriage blessing, about 640 words. The Nam Sta Gishni, or praise of Uharmazd, about 260 words. The Afrin-e, tu peshgahe kuda, so called from its first words, about 190 words, and other benedictions and prayers which have not been examined. A Pahlavi version of the Sadar Bundahish is also said to exist, but must be a modern translation, for the Sadar itself, although often written in Avesta characters, seems to be rather Persian than Pazand, as it contains many Arabic words. Dastur Pesotanje mentions a few more Pahlavi texts, some of which may be included among those described above, but under different names. There are also several Persian texts, such as the Book of Dadar bin Dad Dukt, and so on, which may have originated in Pahlavi. From the above details, we may form some idea of the probable extent of the scanty remnants of Pahlavi literature, without making any allowance for works which remain unexamined or have escaped observation. It appears that the extant Pahlavi translations from the Avesta exceed 104,000 words, and the other Pahlavi works exceed 413,000 words, making a total of upwards of 517,000 words in all the extant Pahlavi writings which have been examined. This total is nearly 11 times the extent of the Pahlavi Vendadad, or 40 times that of the Bundahish. The Parsi community has been doing a good deal of late years for the preservation of the last remnants of their national literature, but it would be better if their efforts were of a more systematic character before much more is done for encouraging the publication of isolated texts. A systematic inquiry for manuscripts should be set on foot for the purpose of ascertaining which are the oldest and best manuscripts, so as to avoid the error of editing text without reference to the best materials. Influential members of the Parsi community, assisted by the Dasturs, ought to have but little difficulty in inducing all possessors of manuscripts to supply a properly organized committee with complete catalogues of their collections. Such catalogues need only be lists of the names of the works, with the names and dates of the copyists when these are recorded, but all undated manuscripts supposed to be more than a century old should be specifically noted. From such lists, the committee should easily prepare a statement of all extant text and of the owners of several of the more valuable manuscripts of each text. Possessed of this information, the next step would be to obtain a copy of the oldest manuscript of each text, beginning with the rarest works, and have it collated with one or two of the next oldest manuscripts. Not being copies of the first, these collated copies, if correctly made without any attempt at emendation, would form standard editions of the text, and should be carefully preserved in some public institution accessible to all members of the Parsi community, such as the Mullah Firuz Library. It can hardly be expected that Westergaard's edition of the Avesta text can be much improved from any manuscripts to be found in India, although copies from Yazd or Kirman in Persia might afford valuable emendations coming from an independent source, but it is generally understood in India that there are very few such manuscripts still existing in Persia. Justi's old Bactrian dictionary is a tolerably complete collection of the Avesta words, but requires to be supplemented by the addition of many words contained in the Dirangastan, Furhange, Oim, Kaduk, and Ogamada Etcha, and the meanings attached to the words want careful revision. With regard to Pahlavi text, it would be important to discover any Pahlavi Vendadad or Yasna descended from any other source than the manuscripts of Mihirapan, Kai Khusro, also to find the first three Fargards missing from his manuscripts in Europe in his own handwriting, the first two books of the Deen card, the Pahlavi text of the latter part of the Shikan Gumani, chapters 28 to 30 of the Bundahish, and a complete Pahlavi version of the Jamasp Namak are all desiderata regarding which some information might be obtained by a systematic inquiry for manuscripts. Hitherto, the Parsis have had to rely upon Europeans for all explanations of their literature. Beyond the merely traditional learning of their priesthood, they may always rely upon some European being ready to carry on such investigations, provided the materials be forthcoming, and Europeans, in their turn, ought to be able to rely on the Parsis for the discovery of all existing materials and for the rendering them accessible.